Okay. All right, so this seems like a lot of questions. I know some of them may not apply, and if you
Okay.
haven't had any
Sure.
experience with it, it's no big deal. Is there anything that you wish you knew before you started standards-based grading?
um, let's see. That will take me a second to think, but um, some things that I realized along the way. So I guess that would fall under this category. Number one is I wish I knew that. Well, let me back up. So when my students apply for standards, I have to somehow mark them either as proficient or mastery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even a year and a half later, as I'm into standard-based grading, I still don't have like those very clear, definitive
Like a rubric?
definitions,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
because one of the things I love about standard-based grading is differentiation, right? It's kind of like a choose your own journey novel,
Mm-hmm.
right? And um, so to put rubrics on every standard is almost impossible, right? So I have 40 standards in my one class, and
Mm-hmm.
students have to show mastery of 25 of the 40.
Wow.
And yet, so for each standard, you might have 25 to 30 different projects representing a standard. And so like to kind of define mastery in each case is really difficult. And so it does rely a lot on kind of teacher subjectivity, and I don't like that. I'm someone who's very, I like to break down every activity into its, and break it down for students so that, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, this is the grade you'll get. But a lot of times standard-based grading, I feel like, and maybe this is what I wish I still knew, I feel like that it doesn't always offer that. Now, sometimes there is, right? Sometimes it's take this quiz to show this standard, right? That you have this mastered this concept or this skill. But the way that we do it in my class, where it's kind of a portfolio-based grading and students are constantly handing in artifacts, there's still a lot of discussion. But the discussion, though, is always good discussion, right? Because the students will say, well, why am I proficient but not, why am I not showing mastery? And then we get into the discussion there. And I've never had issues with parents a year and a half or students yet, but that's because I remain very flexible and I'm always constantly having conversations, but I could just imagine. So when I jumped into it, I kind of wish I had had maybe some more training, or even now, I guess.
Do you find though that your kids like surprise you? Like you're like, wow,
That's
that's
right.
a great way to do the
Yes,
standard.
absolutely, and that's why I don't. That's why I'm hesitant, right, to make those changes, because then you kind of lose the beauty of standard-based grading. Is really the learner agency involved in the students doing things that you wouldn't. You put them in a box.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do whatever's in that box. But when you remove the box, they can go to pretty cool places.
Yeah. Now, which class are you doing this in all your English, or this is just for?
Yeah, it's just for Global Leadership Seminar, but we're starting to now think in our English classes about how we could do standard-based grading. So we're thinking about doing like a final project just on standard-based grading. So you think about in English, our major objectives are to write argumentative, to think critically, to read closely, right? So whatever your major standards are, to create some sort of project at the end of the year that aligns with those standards, and students then have to, it's kind of same thing. Don't put them in a box, but say to them, prove to me that you can do these things.
Right. So you've kind of already said, like in your classroom, the kids kind of have a list of standards, and they have to show you that they've met it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add about what that looks like in your classroom?
Yeah. So there's a lot of teacher guidance along the way. It's not just here's 40 standards, like I'll see you at the end of the semester type thing. So we do mini units, and for each unit there's a research and reflection component, and I will say, hey, if you score an 8 out of 10 or better on this reflection, I would really consider applying for standard blah 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 and use this as your artifact, right? Or we do what we call shotgun projects, which are these kind of rushed mini projects where it kind of forces that collaboration in the 4 C's. And I say, and sometimes we'll pick a winner, and winners automatically are eligible for these standards. So you can win standards, but then the losers of those projects will sometimes end up with more standards even than the winner, because they might have failed, but failed spectacularly, right? There was creativity and critical thinking in their failure. There was just maybe a technological malfunction or a lack of follow through on one of the members, right? So they can still improve their grade dramatically even in failure, which is the beauty of a standards-based grading thing. So there's projects, there's reflections, and then sometimes we do things to we do what we call a class project where I become one of their colleagues and I help them. And we do it every 10 days. We pause for 2 days and work on this project together. But I show them how I think through the standards. So when we're done doing something, I'll go, that was standard 16. Like, I'm going to fill mine out. Let's all do that together. And so kind of show them what that thought process looks like so modeling, right? Modeling for them. They have to work on an independent project throughout the year, which is their final exam. And for each part of the project, there's 5 parts to it. It says in their directions, you should, once you're done with this part, you should consider applying for, blah, 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 these standards, right? So there's a lot of guidance along the way.
Okay. And you mentioned you haven't had a lot of parent pushback. Are there any positives that you got from parents about this?
Oh, parents all love it, but the caveat there is that it's an elective course, right? And I'm not, foolish enough to think that parents will love it when their grades are based on English too. But there is some really positives. Number one, right, like students really love the class. They really love the freedom, the learner agency, and then they go home and tell their parents of how awesome this is. The parents love the idea that, right, and one of the best things about standard-based grading is there is a level of transparency. It holds a lot of people accountable. Students can't reach certain standards until the teacher teaches to the standards, right? And then, instead of in power schools sometimes, right, you'll see quiz 1, right, and the student gets an F and the parent has no idea why, but if you have standards kind of in your grade book, parents will say, oh, okay, they've learned this, they haven't learned that. So there's a level of transparency I think the teachers, the parents do like, but there's definitely negatives too, and if you want, I can talk about those. But
well, I mean, for one thing, did you have to do a bunch of educating parents about what the grade book looks like and what to expect to see?
Absolutely. So the early parent-teacher conference, there's a big packet that gets sent home early in the year that says grading expectations, and parents have to sign that. And if they don't, like, I got to call home and say, well, make sure you know what you're getting into. And then on the parent-teacher conference, I spend the whole 10, 12 minutes there just talking about grading. And students and parents have to be comfortable with failure because at the quarter mark right now, I have about 5 or 6 C's and everyone else is D's and F's because we start with that 0 and we slowly work our way up as we get more and more standards. So even the best student right now, right, has a C at the quarter mark. So I give everyone an incomplete and then I send home individual interims that say, here's where your student ranks in the class. Here's where your student is on pace for. Here's, what you said, that kind of written evaluation to parents at that time as well, and that has to get signed and brought back to me. So there is a lot of explaining, and that's burdensome.
What are some drawbacks?
Well, the big thing, right, you have college athletes that are meeting with coaches and their grade is an F. You have kids applying for mid-year scholarships and their grade is an F. And so I've written a template of a letter that students who are going to meet with, whoever it might be that's interested in their grade. I just print it out, sign it, write their actual grade in. So I've kind of made that process a little quicker, but it's still a pain, right? And it's a pain for some of the students that some people want to know what their grade is right then, and then we just don't have the knowledge, the shared knowledge within our learning community of what standard-based grading is. So you have these kids like swearing to parents and coaches and club, advisors, right? I think even in maybe national honors, right? Don't you have to keep a certain?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. See, and talking to somebody who's doing this brings up a whole bunch of issues that people need to consider.
Exactly.
I think.
So that's one of the biggest things right there. It's just all the stakeholders of students' grades need to be educated and aware, and there needs to be an easy way to communicate that.
Any other negatives with parents?
Well, again, I imagine that if this was my English classes, and the other thing I should write too is that only half of their grade in that class is standard-based grading. The other half is the old-fashioned way where they submit content. Something and I hand it back with a grade on it. But yeah, I imagine that if this was an English class and the student's grade depends upon their passing or failing, or the student's what do you call it? Not retention, but when they move on to the next grade level.
Yeah.
Depends on passing or failing my English class, and the parents get an incomplete. That's not going to sit well with a lot of them, especially the students too that have traditionally floated on that D area, right? That's like they've made it their habit, and parents really rely on that up-to-date, minute-by-minute data that they can then kind of hold over their child's head, which is unfortunate, right? Because it's really teaching that student too that you can operate in this way and be successful by kind of skirting by.
Well, I would imagine the procrastinator as well. You're a kid, but who puts everything off until the last minute.
Which certainly, yeah. And so that'll happen too, right? The last week I'll have 4 or 5 kids with Fs, and they just hand in all these standards. And some of the kids, right, will hand in all these standards with brilliant work, because they've been really interested in the content, and they've been really doing things in the class, and their grade jumps from an F to an A in one weekend. But then other kids will try the same thing, but they won't have done anything, and then they go from an F to an F or an F to a D, and now they want all these, they want answers. And actually, I shouldn't say I haven't had any problems. I did have a parent email, but I wrote her back like this long email of all the things put into place and blah, 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 blah. And she wrote back like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know any of this. My child lied to me. He will be punished, like that type of thing. So I did get one angry parent last year from one of the few students who have failed the class. But it was resolved. And again, I've had to put in place you got that interim and you signed it and it said he was behind, and you got that letter that explained the grading and you signed it, right? So I've had to put into all these place things that you can kind of make sure when the angry parents do come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the grade book, you have basically every standard has a category. Is that it in the grade book?
That's what I want right now. So the first year that I did it, I just put in one thing called standard-based grading, but that was as unclear as anything, right? And so it was 50% of their grade, but as you saw that grade go up, their actual grade would go up too. Now I have it categorized into the 8 C's instead of the 4 C's. I got the 4 C's plus content, cultural awareness, credibility, and creation. So I've categorized my 40 standards into 8 categories, and I have now the categories in there, so you can actually see like their grades going up as it relates to the category, but the specific standards aren't in there. That would just be too burdensome for me to have every time they apply for a standard to like update one of those. So I would like to move to that way, but at Power Schools isn't that friendly with that, and so that might be something I look at more over the summer, so that they can see the specific writing of each standard instead of the category.
So like a test or a quiz or a little assignment, that's all content, right?
That doesn't include the standards, right? And I don't give tests or quizzes in that class, so it's all project-based learning and reflecting and stuff like that. So and that's another thing, right? Like that doesn't fly in some of the math, and right, you need to be assessed in those ways. In science, I imagine too.
Yeah, I've seen it done. That's what I was trying to get a feel for. Do you like, I know in science, at my old school, we did something very similar where we had school-wide learning outcomes.
Yeah.
And content was one, and every assignment had a content grade, but maybe also had professionalism or communication or something with it. So every assignment might have 2 or 3 or 4 grades.
Yeah.
But then you'd have to like figure out how to make a test worth more because it was content, and tests were just all content.
Yeah.
So you had to make sure that all your tests were like 100 points and all your quizzes, to be able to make it calculate with the proper weighting. Yeah. So I was wondering, a lot of people are going to want weights, I think, when they do this, and that it sounds like that's just kind of you're going to have to do a lot of that in the background. That Power School is not probably going to.
Yeah, what I would recommend for parents, for teachers who are interested in trying it, though, is I think what English teachers are trying is to do something like a big project first, and attach so like however you set up your grade book, because every teacher or every PLT sets it up differently, weighted or non-weighted, but create a project that's worth 100 points, and then attach 10 standards or whatever the amount is of standards to that, and each one being 10 points. And then, they have to show that they've met those standards to get that grade. So it's kind of like a combination of the two. But it gets teachers a little bit familiar with the idea of, what a standards class would look like, while also maintaining the same structure of their grade book or something. That's what we're trying to do now. So not like just jumping into this crazy way of setting up your grade book.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you find that at the end of the semester, then, when grades are coming due, you're just inundated with?
The first semester, yes.
Okay.
And then that I've been putting into place. So now, like, like the first semester, I had no Husky help, right? It was like, right. But now, like, if you don't have this many standards in, you're behind. You're in Husky help. If you don't have this part of your final project in by this date, you are behind. And then I've also set aside time, like a half hour each week, where everyone stop, fill out standards, reflect on what you've done this week. So not as bad now.
Okay, so you do a lot, though, to kind of support the kids, and hey, you need to get some standards in.
Absolutely, and it's been this is my fourth semester now, and it's by far the best in terms of students having grades that are constantly improving, because I've just learned from that. So that would be another thing that I would have liked to know about, right? I guess, yeah.
Yeah, so did you teach this course without standards-based grading before? So you've
No.
always taught it. I was going to ask you if you noticed a change in enthusiasm, but...
No, I didn't. When I pitched the course to Dr. Savage, and I told him I wanted to be, unique, and I wanted it to be, kind of cutting edge in terms of what everyone's talking about in the world of education, almost like a test tube for educational theory. And he's the one who told me, well, let's do standards-based grading and see how it works. So it's been that way. I will say that I am a huge proponent of standard-based grading. I love it. I recognize its limitations. I don't do it in all of my classes. I don't know if it's right for every class. I just don't know. But this class, and if you, like, any teacher or student who's gone through it, they'll say it's the most unique class they've been in, their favorite class. I do a ton of feedback with the students. We just did a seminar where students had to reflect on, like, the semester and what went well. Like, in fact, the 40 standards, I would say half of them were created by students of things that they, they thought they, skills that they think developed that wasn't on there the first time around. So, like, the students have this total buy-in. There is a few students every semester who are just like you said, like, one of the problems I think we all agree as teachers in education is we've trained some of our students to be, I don't know what the right word is, but kind of that sit and get education. Here's a worksheet, fill it out, here's a quiz, here's a test, and they do a crappy job, and they just want that D. But those students who are just waiting for the teacher to do all that for you, to create the test, to grade the test, those students really struggle in the class, because one of the most powerful things about learner agency is student choice, but it's the choice to fail too. And so I'm not going to sit here and get you that D. Like, you have to do something even to just get that D. You have to work and then show me you've worked, and then reflect on your work and apply for the standard. But that choice of failure, though, is liberating and empowering for a lot of the students too, though, who have kind of maybe been that D type of student. Not for all of them, but for some of them, it's like, oh, like, I can now be an A student.
Right.
Like, oh, okay. And then some of them, it's really awesome to see. But yeah, some of them just, it's almost the worst case scenario after, 11, 10 years of an educational system that's just trained them to sit there, wait for the teacher to hand you a piece of paper, and, and they love, and they thrive in that environment, and their procrastination and their laziness. Like, this is not a good environment for them.
Right. And that was one of the questions that I had to ask was, do you notice, like, your really high flyers having more resistance to this?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, the high flyers, the ones, and I do give a speech on the first day, not to scare students out, because, I show them the bell curve, and my bell curve is like 90% A and like 10% D's and F's. You don't have a lot of B's and C's, because in standard-based grading, like even their final exam, it's 5 parts. You can start on the first day of class. You can submit it for a grade as many times as you want. Like with standards, if you don't reach mastery on this artifact, just keep trying, right? So you choose the grades you ultimately want if the teacher is there to support you. So the bell curve, and I don't say, hey, this is a difficult class. I say, you're either going to get an A in this class or an F. A few of you are going to get an F. And right now, what we need to figure out if that's you, and here are the characteristics of students, right? And it's not your high flyers that are always getting A's. Like, it's a cool mix of kids. It's kids that are just naturally curious. It's kids that are bored out of their mind in a traditional classroom setting, but are naturally curious students. They thrive. but your high flyers too, they'll do anything to get the A, and once they learn the system, they do it.
Do you ever notice higher levels of frustration in them at first as they get, because they are so good at school?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a hesitancy. They don't like when, they because you can get like I said, proficiency, which gets you a half point. So every standard makes your grade go up 2 points, because there's 25 standards they have to get, and it's 50, half of their grade. And so if you reach proficiency, you get 1 point, but you can apply again, right? And then if so there's 2 ways to show mastery. Either it's a habitual tendency to do this standard, or it's just an exemplar, right? And that's kind of that gray subjective area that I talked about. But those students, those high flyers at the beginning, when they hand something in and I write, proficient, and they get 1 out of 2, and they're like, well, why? Like, I did it, and I did this. And I said, well, and it's a great question, and sometimes I struggle to answer that question. But I tell them, look, here's my exemplar, right? Here's what credibility looks like. Here's a annotated bibliography with, multiple sources, and here's what yours looks like, right? It's good, right? It's 4 sources, some mistakes, like, it's not bad, right? And like, so there's a lot of like, and that's the other part, right? Now that I'm in my 4th semester, I have all these exemplars, but I didn't have them the first couple, and I still don't have them for every standard. Like, here's exactly what I'm looking for. Here's my exemplar. Here's the characteristics of it. So I'm still kind of defining that as well, and that will get some of the high flyers a little bit frustrated.
Right. Do you hold your exemplars, though, for those discussions? You don't show them up?
I don't, right? Because that will start to put them in that box already.
Right, exactly. Okay.
And then they'll just do exactly what they just saw. Yeah, so I hold those for discussions. The other frustrating part, too, is, and this is another place where some of my not low students, but students who will get maybe D's or C's in other classes, those super creative students who are bored, is these students will, when they do like shotgun projects, they'll fail miserably, but like spectacularly. They try things that are so crazy and outlandish because they just love the creativity and the process of learning. They're not always great at producing the outcomes teachers want, but those students thrive in the environment a lot of times, and some of our high flyers have been, and they measure their GPA by the decimal point. They've been taught over the last few years of high school to take a very calculated approach to every single thing they do. And so they're going to end up with an A in the class, but it's kind of this slower pace to reaching those standards. They're not shooting for the stars. They're not reaching their full potential, and they're not, reveling in the learning process of their mistakes. They are succeeding slightly every time. And actually, that's an interesting thing and something I might look for. I wonder if those high flyers, they're the ones who show the habit of the because there's 2 ways to reach that mastery level, either the habitual work or, showing a habit of that standard, or the exemplar. I'd be interested to like look at that data, because they seem to be the more of the kids that like just do good over and over again, instead of doing something where I'm like, whoa,
right,
that's amazing. That'd be really interesting to track that data, which I haven't.
Do you wish you had a PLT to do this with?
Well, absolutely, with this particular class. So like King, Gunsher, right? They have, and it's 2 different. We talk sometimes about it and how you're grading and how I'm grading. But actually, what's interesting, this class, I just got the okay. It's going to be a Wake County approved class, and so I hope to do a county-wide PLT with it and lead that next year.
Well, that's the other reason it's good then that we're getting you here, so that because they are talking about using some of the stuff that we're creating through Teacher Leader Corps as county-wide training materials, this may be available to teachers in the county. Yeah. So this might be good then.
Yeah, I would hope. I would love to work collaboratively with teachers on this.
Yeah. Okay, and because the other thing I think I've always found is just support, having somebody. I know that when I can say to a parent, this is not my test, this is the biology test. Or something, it does help. Yeah. Since you don't have that, do you find that administrative support is more important to you with this?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, what kind of administrative supports have you had to have?
Well, again, the thing is that, number one, it's an elective, right? And so my first semester, we went into this saying this might fail spectacularly, and the behind-the-scenes administrative discussion we had is I will not fail a single student my first semester. You sit there and do nothing, the whole time, I'm going to give you a D. I didn't tell that to any student, but we were trying things that were so different. And my class has changed dramatically since, because I learned so much from that. But you don't get that same type of freedom you know what I mean?
No, you don't.
So I wonder so from the very beginning, because this wasn't just my class, it was collaborative, but it was collaborative with the administrators. Like, they were the ones saying, try this, right? Vision 2020, the strategic plan. These are all the things that Wake County wants us to try. Let's see what they actually look like. Let's test them in a Wake County classroom. And so I had full support, and that made all the difference. And now, after that first semester, we said, okay, here's what works, here's what doesn't. All right, you still have those students who are not doing anything. What are we going to do with them? What supports will be put in place so that if we do fail them, that we can say this, and you know what I mean? So yeah, that support was obviously, without it, that first semester couldn't have happened. And if that first semester doesn't happen, I guess the course doesn't happen. So you have to have that.
Yeah, and I wonder if, like an English class, like you said, approach it with a project and just have a piece.
Yeah.
Be standard.
Yeah, and you could even have, so we have 5 categories. Actually, we had 5, and we got rid of homework, and then we just integrated homework into our writing, reading, grammar, and speaking and listening. But I wonder if you could have a 5th category too, and then in that category, let's say it's worth 10 points of your total grade, is just those 10 standards, or whatever amount of standards you and your PLT comes up with. So you could either do a project and put the project into, composition, but have all these different standards, within the project, or you could make it a category with standards within the category. Those would be the 2 approaches that I would recommend a PLT starts with.
Right, and then that would be something that probably, it's a small enough chunk. It's not enough to fail the kid.
That's right.
So you can still earn your credit to go to the next level or whatever. Yeah. But
and maybe even have that discussion with the PLT and admin before. Hey, we're trying this. What safety net do we put in place here? Do we curve without telling them? If kids fail spectacularly because it's so new and so different, and but we see some sort of effort there. Like, what are we doing here, right? So that discussion needs to be had too, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's the questions.
All right. Cool.
So thank.